Oh, good.
So am I supposed to stand someplace special for the
Go ahead.
camera?
Wherever you want.
Right in front of the screen.
But there's cute kids. and
Behind the
there's
screen.
There's gonna be mushrooms too.
Yay.
Okay, well, thanks so much for inviting me. I haven't been to the Santa Cruz Club for, since before the pandemic stopped all of the Fungus Federation fairs in January. I had been to several of them before the shutdown, so this is great to be back and great to see several people that I know here and haven't seen in quite a long time. So, and it was also great that we were able to come inside and didn't have to stay outside in the cold with no power and me just holding up my laptop. So everyone can hear me okay, or do I need to talk a little louder? Okay, so it sounds good. So I saw a show of hands about people that this was their first time coming to this club, coming to a meeting. And so in addition to that, is there also quite a few people that it's like you're just like a newbie to mushrooming, or definitely not an expert? Okay, great. So that's like, that's okay. That's over half of the hands. Great. So this talk will be for you. Even if you're an absolute expert, you'll probably see some stuff here that you've never ever heard of before. So just hang on to your hats. Anyways, unless you've been, so the theme will be why the planet needs fungi now to make the place more resilient, and you'll kind of see that'll be a theme running through a number of the different slides of weird fungi doing weird things. But, so we'll start out with kind of a downer, because unless you've been living under a rock, you've no doubt seen in like all kinds of media and on TV and printed matter news about climate change and all sorts of other things happening to the planet, biodiversity loss, fires everywhere, temperatures heating up, ice melting, water rising, and Fungi Magazine's no different. As was mentioned, we've published Fungi Magazine now we're in our 17th year. We do 4 issues every year that come out seasonally, plus a special topics issue. A couple of years ago, we had a special topics issue devoted to all of these different problems with the planet and how fungi can help them. There's no possible way that most of you can read any of the words on this centerfold that was in the magazine, but in the center, around the perimeter, are all sorts of different problems going on the planet. You know, biodiversity loss, invasive species, plastics in the ocean, climate change and heating up, and all of this sort of business. And throughout the issue, we had several scientists and articles about them and their work using fungi to fix some of these problems. It was a really exciting issue and very gratifying for me. So that'll be kind of what's also preview what's going on. If you know anything about fungi at all, or you just started getting into to fungi, or if you went to the fair that was over the weekend, you heard people talking about the planet being saved by fungi and stuff like that. So everybody kind of knows fungi are important to the planet. How they're important is not so well understood. So fungi can renew soils by breaking down organic matter and making compost and fixing soils. Fungi can be used instead of pesticides to protect plants from pathogens. But how they do all of this isn't really well known, like the chemistry and the biology that goes along with it. And this is some of the areas of research right now that's actually really, really exciting. It's a very exciting time to be a mycologist. And so most of the stories will come from this book. Peter said that I think the publisher has authorized members of this club to use a special code. I think maybe it's the next slide. Yeah, so if you go to Princeton University Press and want to get copies of the book, the cover price is $30. I saw some copies in the bookstore in town a couple days ago. If you go to the website of the press, you can get books at 30% off by using this code, BUN30, and I think that they are delivered free, shipping free. And it's a big hardback book. It's actually a pretty big book with lots and lots of photos and stuff like that. It's pretty well made, and it's pretty cheap. Even if you don't get the discount, it's pretty cheap. So that QR code is there. So the couple main themes running through the book when they approached me about doing this book and ideas that I had about it, they had sort of a laundry list of what needed to be in it, percentages of this and that, and word counts and stuff like that. And the 2 main themes are sort of things that we cover every issue of Fungi Magazine. The 2 main themes kind of are much of what we thought we knew about fungi turns out recently ain't necessarily so. There's a lot of really exciting things that have been happening in mycology. And then the other theme is much about the 5th kingdom is actually hidden in plain sight, like all around us. So we'll see some stuff about crazy fungi that are on the other side of the planet or far-flung places. And that's exciting, but too bad I can never get to see them. Well, I'll also show some pictures of things that are quite literally around the outside of your house, in urban areas, inside your house, maybe even on your skin. So there's a lot of really bizarre, fungi doing bizarre things that are pretty exciting, and you don't necessarily have to travel far to see them. Okay, so that's that may or may not be all of the shameless ads for the book, but some of them will be subliminal, so you won't necessarily know that you're being enticed to purchase the book. So anyways, as I mentioned, it's a great time to be a mycophile. Right now, where I live, morels are popping up. I heard Kitty talking about it, and if you're on Facebook, you've seen Kitty bragging about all of her morels. So you don't have to be back in the Midwest. There's morels around here too, but this is what the woods looks like right now where I live, like literally right where I live. People are picking morels, and I'm here under my own free will, giving a lecture and missing out on these. Besides joining clubs like this and getting involved and going out and doing your own thing in the woods, there's some other ways that you can get involved, which is pretty exciting. There's a lot of different citizen scientist movements to document fungi and other organisms too, and you can post findings on places like iNaturalist and Mushroom Observer. If you find stuff that's interesting to you and you don't necessarily know what it is, you can post things on there, and people are only too happy to, within minutes, seconds, give you an identification, and then of course start arguing over who has the right name and whether it's edible. That's a lot of fun. There's other groups to join besides this mycological society. There's NAMA was mentioned, the North American Mycological Association. That's the sort of umbrella group for all of the NAMA societies in North America, and I think there's maybe 90 of them. And obviously this is one. The Academic Society of North America is the Mycological Society of America, and these two groups sometimes do joint events together, and scientists that are in MSA are, there's some in this room, and they go to club events too. Why am I mentioning all of this is the reason I'm in MSA, and I'm the NAMA liaison to Mycological Society of America. So they actually want me to mention that there's other organizations and things you can do in bioblitzes and stuff to get involved, not just in your area, not just with your club, but all over North America. So there's fundus and mycoblitzes and things like that. And then obviously your local forest. So the thing is, a lot of these actions by citizen science groups and bioblitzes and mycoblitzes and stuff like that, they're very important to document what we have now before, we continue suffering habitat and species loss. It's really important to document stuff like that now. But one thing that's always been fascinating to me is what's the organisms doing? And in fact, this was something that Gary Linkoff always talked about. He would often say, you know the mushroom, but do you really know the mushroom? Meaning, you know the name, or at least you think you know the name, but what's it doing in the environment? Do you know what it's doing in the environment? That was always a lot more exciting to me. As a university professor, I was more interested not so much in taxonomy, but in ecology, and the stuff I worked on had to do with interrelationships and coevolution and stuff like that. So in fact, let me just take a sip of water. So this is a good place to dive right in, because most people in here, if not everyone, knows morels. I know morels that are in the Midwest, and then there's morels like this, these Western burn morels. Everybody knows morels, but do you really know the morels? Everyone knows they're saprobic, right? They rot stuff and things like this. And that's actually partly true. It turns out morels, at least some morels, and some other closely related species, like some gyrometras, which are sort of the next closest group to morels, many of them are purely saprobic. Many of them seem to be facultatively biotrophic, that is, they have to have a living partner. In the Midwest where I live, we don't typically have burns, so we go out and look for morels around elm trees and a few other species, and the very next year after one of these trees dies, you can bet there'll be morels popping up around the tree. And it's sort of a similar situation to what's going on here with these burn morels. So there was a fire here for years and years and years, and a fire came through, burned up the forest, and next year there's burn morels. So this always puzzled people. People have known about this phenomenon for centuries. In fact, you can go back and see that there's still laws, believe it or not, on the books in some European countries. Germany, for example, has laws that says you cannot burn down forests to cause this to happen next year because that's bad. So people have known about burn morels for a long time. But when I was a student, that wasn't all that long ago, it still really wasn't known what caused burn morels. People puzzled over, was it something about like the smoke that somehow drew spores into land and then start fruiting the next year or the next month? Was it the heat released some properties from the soil or the wood? I mean, people actually had, like, it seems ridiculous now, but ideas like that because they didn't know what caused it. Turns out morels that have to do with burns, just like the morels that have to do with the elm trees in the Midwest where I live, they're actually growing biotrophically, it seems, with a living host and doing whatever they need to do basically forever, reproducing maybe asexually or maybe just never. They just keep living. And then when their host dies, then they go into sexual reproductive mode and make mushrooms. And these aren't the only things that do this. There's other fire-associated fungi. While you're busy scurrying around picking up burn morels, if you bother to take notice, there's other fire-associated fungi, or pyrophilous fungi as they're called. This is Geopixus carbonaria. Probably several of you have seen this before. They're a small cup and they can be in profusion on the forest floor. Nobody picks them for food because they're too small and rubbery, but it's a fairly close relative of morels. And they also are never ever seen really, maybe one or two once in a while, but after burn, the forest will be covered with them. So what the heck's going on here? Well, what's going on is the burn morels didn't come to this forest after the fire. They were always there. And I was giving a lecture kind of similar to this 2 months ago at one of the NAMA clubs in Virginia, and so someone said, do you think there's burn morels around here? And I'm like, of course there are. There's burn morels everywhere. There's burn morels in the upper Midwest, and they had never ever been seen because there never were fires. People moved to this region and suppressed fire because they don't want their property to be burned up. So they prevent fires from happening. And lo and behold, in the 90s, there was a weird, rare fire event in the Upper Peninsula, Michigan, and sure enough, there were burn morels the next year. Commercial pickers were picking there. No one had ever seen these before, ever. There was no record of it. But they were always there, waiting for fire. The reason the person asked me about, do I think that they're in Virginia, is because, unbeknownst to me, they had a burn. And so right now, people are actually in Virginia picking burn morels. They'd never ever had a record of a burn in like 250 years. Wow. And now there's burn morels all over. So after the talk, the guy who was moderating the Zoom part of it, he was like, you wouldn't believe it, but like all these questions were coming in, people asking about, wait, did he just say what I think he said? What about the fire that occurred over in such and such place? And so people, basically making plans, booking hotel rooms, probably right then and there. So what's going on here? These fungi that are fire associated were always in the soil. Actually, they weren't even in the soil, they were in the plants. They were growing inside of the plants. So they're a partner with the plant, growing maybe endophytically in the roots or even in the stem. When the fire comes and burns through, now these guys come out in fruit. So if you think about some of the fire-associated plants, like in the Sierras and around here, Arctostaphylos, the manzanita, a lot of them are sort of fire associated. They're fire resistant. Some of them have like great big fat bases on them. When they get great big, the branches maybe all burn off. But the thing, after the fire goes away, the thing starts sprouting branches back out. It's not gone. Its competition might be gone, and it's believed that the fungi that are endophytic or mycorrhizal with it, they give this plant a jump start when the forest soil is denuded, and then that's partly how they get going fresh. Here's another fungus. You've probably never heard of this guy, Lacocephalum mylitti, the stone maker mushroom. These sclerotia underground get like as big as a basketball. Has anyone ever heard of this? Before 3 years ago, before they had a big fire episode everywhere in Australia because of climate change, this thing was so rare. If you went on Mushroom Observer, iNaturalist, there was like one observation. It was super rare mushroom. Yet this sclerotium used to be so well known by indigenous people. It was called Aboriginal bread. Every season, Aborigines would go out specifically looking for this and dig it up and consume it as food. It's a big starchy tuber. Here's one sliced in half. So it used to be so common that people had a name for it and would go looking for it. And then all of a sudden it became super rare. And the reason it became super rare is because Europeans showed up in Australia and started suppressing fire. It never happened. So all of my mycologist friends were like, you would not believe this mushroom that has been on everyone's list we want to see. The caps get as big around as a dinner plate. You would see it if it was in the forest. They'd never seen it before. After these fires, there were millions of them everywhere in Australia. Turns out super common. It was everywhere. It just never fruited because there were never fires. It's so uncommon we still don't really know much about its life cycle. It seems to be mycorrhizal, and there must be like a hyphae that's attached to the sclerotium that's attached to the tree, but again, nobody really knows. So pretty cool. So obviously it's important to the forest, and after a fire, there's now soil ready, the trees that have evolved with fire, the cones open, a lot of the fire-associated trees have serotinous cones that are covered with wax. They stay on the tree forever. Unless there's a fire, then they heat up and melts the wax off, and then the seeds fall to the floor. And then a lot of these fungi are important to get these seedlings jump-started. But after a big forest fire, this is a problem, right? This is a big problem. The forest is burned up. But this isn't actually the real problem. The real problem is going to come later in the season when the rains come and wash all the soil away. And if stuff doesn't start growing on the soil right away, and the soil does wash away from rains, now you have no topsoil, and now you start running into a really big problem down the road. So if you, as an example, if you see aerial and satellite photos of the island of Hispaniola in the Caribbean, on one side of the island is the nation of Haiti, and on the other side of the island is Dominican Republic. And so both places make true charcoal. They go and collect wood and get it on fire and then bury it and then make true charcoal to cook with. But on the Dominican Republic side, they're much more good stewards in the forest and replant and are selective about cutting. They've been much more indiscriminate in Haiti, and they've actually caused a major calamity. If you look at aerial photos, you can see where the border of the two countries are. It's a perfect straight line. And on one side, it's very green and forested. On the other side, it's literally a desert. So they haven't been good stewards and tried to get the trees planted back on the soil to hold on to the soil. And then, there's tropical, so rains come all the time, washes the soil away. The next season, the same thing. And that caused a really big problem that, isn't going to be fixed in a short amount of time. This lady here is Camille Stevens-Rumon. She's a scientist. She's world famous, a post-fire restoration scientist working in the forestry department at Colorado State University. She's been a lecturer at the Telluride Mushroom Festival a couple times, and she's works with fungi and inoculates tree seedlings to get them a jump start when they're planted after a fire. And so you can see these seedlings here. Well, I don't know if you can tell that a lot of them have like 2 feet or more growth per year. They're growing really, really quickly and getting established nicely and holding onto the soil. Her husband is a beetle expert, so he studies the bark beetles that kill the trees that then lead to the fire, which is when she comes in. So they make kind of a nice pair studying this phenomenon. If you've been to the Rockies before, you've seen these huge swaths of the forest that have been killed by the beetles. The beetles aren't anything new, they've always been there, but now it seems with the climate change, the winters aren't as severe and cold, and then the beetles don't get killed off, and so this is a problem, and then there's the fire. So anyways, this is something going on with what people are doing to try to make the planet more resilient. Okay, so we'll back up all the way back to the beginning, and luckily there's like half the audience are beginners. So we'll just do some basics on fungi, some of which everybody knows, and some of which everybody thinks they know, but turns out it's completely false. So, until recently, like just the last few years, when fungi started to get to be popular, until recently, back in the bad old days, like when I was a student, and maybe many of you were a student, when you were in high school, in life science class, you often talked about mammals and birds and things like that, and fish, probably plants quite a bit. If you talked at all about fungi, you probably heard about them maybe for like one single day. And the reason is because they weren't considered to be very numerous, important, or anything, so why waste time? So if you learned anything at all about fungi, you probably learned that maybe they are eukaryotes, maybe they rot things, and that's about it. So you heard about eukaryotes, but no doubt you've forgotten. So here's what eukaryotes are. So if you walked into the forest or just right outside and you found an organism if you looked at the cells, you could determine what kind of an organism it is. So fungi are eukaryotes. Bacteria are prokaryotes, which means they are single-celled and quite simple. They don't have membrane-bound organelles. The vast majority of life on the planet, of course, is bacteria because they've been around the longest. All other life that's more sophisticated are eukaryotes. We're eukaryotes. So that means our cells, fungal cells, plant cells, etc., have membrane-bound organelles, but the difference between plants, animals, fungi, and protozoans is that fungi have cell walls made of chitin, plants have cell walls made of cellulose, and animals do not have cell walls. That's the main differences between those different kingdoms of life. So the thing is about fungi, not being very diverse, it turns out they're extremely diverse, but the problem is there with the asterisk. Most are still poorly known and frankly not even described yet. We think that the vast majority of fungi still we don't have much idea of what they are and what they do. So, and here's an example. So this notion that fungi are really not very diverse stems from probably mostly the fact that most people assume you need very moist conditions for fungi. And that's because you're used to thinking about mushrooms and how to grow mushrooms. And if you're in a mushroom club, no rain, you don't go to the forest because why would you? You went to the forest when it was dry and there weren't any mushrooms, so you're not going to make that mistake again. So yeah, a lot of fungi do need moisture to grow, and we could go into why that is. But it turns out even in very, very dry places there are fungi. In fact, the driest places on Earth, probably fungi are the dominant organisms. Not only not rare, but the dominant. Beaches, mountaintops, and this is scenes from Antarctica. So much of Antarctica is covered in ice, of course, but a lot is not. Where there's ice-free areas of Antarctica, it looks a lot like this. It's like the desert maybe in the southwest. There's vast areas with dry soil, quite rocky. Maybe there's some scrubby plants around, and these scrubby plants are, maybe of one or two species. There's not a whole lot of diversity of plants there. There's probably in this scene, and you can probably see for like 100 miles in that scene. It's a vast area. In that scene, there's probably a few kinds of insects. There may or may not be one species of bird. Maybe there's certainly no amphibians, there's no fish, there's probably no mammals, maybe no reptiles. There's not much of anything there, but a couple types of plants. It turns out in this area, fungi are the dominant organism. This is in Antarctica where it's extremely cold and dry and windy, very intense UV light because of ozone holes that have pretty much always been there. So where's the fungi? The fungi are actually inside of the rocks. If you took any of these rocks, they're quite porous, and broke them open, you'd see these colored bands just under the surface that are black, and sometimes black as well as green. So these are endolithic lichens. Lichens are sort of a colony of organisms that are phototrophic, like algae, cyanobacteria, or maybe both, and then a mycobiont, a fungal partner, or more than one fungal partner. That's the main body. And you know about lichens because you see them around here. So this is obviously a different kind of lichen. They don't really grow on the surface of the rocks because the UV light is so intense it would fry anything. So they're actually just below the surface in this porous rock. They can get enough light penetrating through this layer of rock that the photosynthetic partner can make carbohydrates for its fungal partner, which does the rest of the business of harvesting nutrients and things from the rock. Isn't that incredible? This is the dominating organism here. People have been here. This was discovered not all that long ago, in my lifetime. Isn't that crazy? Did you have a question, Peter? Or you just stretched it out?
So do mushrooms just grow out of the rocks there?
So definitely not mushrooms. This is a different type of a fungus. The vast majority of fungi do not make any type of a structure that you would recognize as a mushroom. They might make a fruiting body of some sort that's tiny, but I mean, we wouldn't call it a mushroom. So, so like the mushroom type fungi are basidiomycetes, and there's a few ascomycete type fungi that make, a mushroom like a morel. But the vast majority of fungi don't make anything like that at all. So most ascomycetes, which are the vast majority of fungi, they don't make fruit bodies. And certainly a lot of the lower fungi don't. And then there's a lot of type of fungi that are probably the dominant, and I'll mention them in a little bit. Sort of the dominant, most important fungi are arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. They don't make really any structure at all. Probably most don't have sexual reproduction at all, and many of them don't even have genes for sexual reproduction. In fact, we can't even culture most of them. But we know they're probably the most important organism on Earth because they are the ones that are the puppet masters for all the plants. You know, and the plants are how we get how the living organisms, 99% of the living organisms get their food, right? I mean, either you are an eater of sunlight or you're an eater of things that eat sunlight, as we do. So, and that's how fungi get their energy. Okay, so back to some more fungal basics. This notion that fungi are saprobes and decomposers, if you learned anything in school, it's that fungi rot stuff. And isn't this great? Because without fungi around, plants and other material would literally pile up and bury us. You probably heard that in school. And it sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? It turns out it's absolutely true. As ridiculous as it sounds. And it's actually very easy to know this. When woody plants die, the woody part of the plant, that cellulose, there's not many things that can break it down. You've seen organisms eating plants, but they weren't digesting the cell walls. They weren't digesting the cellulose. You've seen maybe your friends who are vegetarians, or cattle grazing, or termites, or wood wasps, or wood-boring beetles. They all seem to be eating wood. They're eating it, but they're not digesting it. Only fungi can do that. Isn't that amazing? So, and it wasn't always the case. And fungi can't even do it that well. There's not that many fungi that can do it, and it's a fairly recent phenomenon. We know this because when you dig down through layers of the soil, you know, you're going back in time. The deeper you go, the farther back in time that was. And you can, once you get so deep in the soil, you reach pockets of stuff called fossil fuels. That was plant material that piled up and eventually got buried, and there was nothing around to rot it. You can keep going deeper past the natural gas and past the petroleum, and you get to coal, which is even older. And then, of course, you know, get much below that, there wasn't really any life at all. There was no plants to make fossil fuels. So if you now reverse and start coming back up through the layers of soil, you climb back through these layers of fossil fuels. You come to a layer where there are no fossil fuels anymore. And if you were to look inside that layer of soil and all the layers above that, instead of seeing fossil fuels, you would see spores of wood rot fungi. So the plants that were piling up all of this woody debris, there were other fungi around, but there weren't any wood rot fungi at the time. When wood rot fungi came onto the scene, then they started breaking down this woody material. No more fossil fuels made. But their spores are still in the soil because they don't really decay. So you can see spores and pollen and things like that from a long, long time ago. In fact, the people that look for fossil fuels, you know, they look for fungal spores and pollen and things like that to know how old the layers of soil are, because these are ancient. So this really, as ridiculous as it sounds, it really is true that once wood rot fungi came onto the scene, we now no longer have to worry about being buried under plants. However, having said that, most fungi, it turns out, are probably not saprobes and decomposers. Most fungi are biotrophic, and they'll be on the next slide. But since we're talking about saprobes, it's actually pretty cool to know how this happens. And this slide basically points out the two ways that fungi rot wood. And you've seen this in the woods, right? When you've been walking along and seen well-rotted logs, some look like this, like lying down on the soil. They're like brown, kind of red-brown, and kind of blocky and cuboidal. You've seen that for sure. Most people's heads are nodding. The others aren't just not at all. So, and there's other types of, other situations where you've seen logs in the woods that were well rotted and they looked like this. They were kind of white and stringy and falling apart. You probably thought in either one of these cases, oh, I don't know what kind of tree that was, but whatever kind of tree it is, when it dies, falls down, and starts falling apart, that's just what this kind of tree does, or that's just what that kind of tree does. If you thought that, you were wrong. It has not that much to do with the tree, it has everything to do with the wood rot fungi that got to the tree after it died. So brown rot fungi, as they're called, leaves behind this. They rot the white cellulose and leave behind the lignin, which is kind of the concrete that holds the cells together. They're not really good at breaking down both, because both are really big molecules with these different bonds shooting off in every direction. It requires a lot of different types of enzymes to break it down. So brown rot fungi rot the cellulose and live off of that, and mostly leave behind the lignin, which is this stuff. There's other stuff that can come along and break it down sometimes, but a lot of the reason that a lot of soils look brown is because there's a lot of lignin left behind. And these are fungi that are familiar with most of us. A lot of the conifer wood, when it's broken down, ends up looking like this. Basidiomycetes are the only ones that can do this. So ascomycetes cannot. So things like Fomitopsis pinicola, sort of like the red-belted polypore in its ilk, Pholinus species, so these are conchs on the sides of trees. It's in color here because I'll show you a picture one. Species of Ledoporus like chicken of the woods mushroom and sulfur shells. These are brown rock fungi, and Phallus schweinitzii, the dyer's puffball. These are brown rock fungi. White rock fungi break down the lignin and to some extent the cellulose and leave behind cellulose. White rock fungi are basidiomycetes, and there's also some ascomycetes that can do this. And so things like honey mushrooms, like Armillaria species, Pleurotus, those are oyster mushrooms. Ganodermas, like artist conchs and things, these are white rock fungi. Turkey tails and species of Trametes are white rock fungi. And then some ascomycetes too. Things like Xylaria, like dead man's fingers, Pizizas, those brown cups that you're probably finding right now when you're looking for morels and disappointed because they're just a brown cup. And then also Chlorosiboria. And this one's in color too because I'll show you Chlorosiboria in just a second. So the thing is with these wood rot fungi growing on the side of the tree like this Phalaenus tremuli here, this is a picture of a big aspen tree in Telluride, Colorado. If you see these wood rot fungi on a standing tree, they're not necessarily harming the tree. They're after the dead heartwood of the tree, which is dead. When you look outside and see a tree, even this big oak tree right here, the vast majority of what you see there is not living. Underneath the bark, the corky part, is the phloem and the xylem, the vascular tissue, and then it's a very thin layer, and inside of that, all that layer in the middle, that's all dead. That's from previous year's growth. Those are all dead cells. So the skin of the tree and the leaves, that's living, but the vast majority is not living. So fungus gets in there and rots the heartwood. It's not the end of the world for the tree. It takes a long time for the fungus to rot that, and maybe after many, many years, the tree could get so weakened that it could break and fall over, but usually as long as they stay put, it's not a big deal. But the thing is, when you see one of these things on the outside of the tree, you might be puzzled as to what's going on. In the case of this guy here, Phalaenus tremuli, it's hard to notice because the conchs look a lot like the scars on where the branches come off the tree, and they're cracked on the top. But if you look underneath, which is how I've positioned this photo, you can see this brown layer here. That's where the small pores are, and the spores come out of there. But it's actually cooler to know what's going on the inside side of the polypore. So if you were to go inside the tree, here's what you would see. Where the tree's attached, this is where it's attached, probably where there was a branch and it got in through that wound. And you can see there's brown rot going on in the wood there where the fungus has invaded and it's rotting away the dead cells of the tree. But something else you might notice about this particular species is it can move into other parts of the tree, out away from this area where it first started. And so you might see at these red arrows, black lines in the wood. And although it doesn't show up super well on the slide, the wood outside those black lines is a more tan, more woody colored wood than the wood on the inside of the lines, if that makes any sense. The wood on the inside is more bleached out and actually almost white. So these black lines, if you've ever seen wooden bowls, guitars, cabinetry, statuary, or whatever that wood turners make that has these black lines, spalted wood, you might ask, what is this? And they might tell you it's something like bird's eye maple or curly maple or something like that. Yeah, there's no such thing as a bird's eye maple or a curly maple. It's wood that's spalted by a fungus. So what's happening is the fungus started here, and its hyphae starts moving into the wood and rotting away as it goes. The tree launches, countermeasures to, like an immune response to keep the fungus contained. And there's probably other microbes in here that everybody's fighting over this with. So the fungus lays down in its hyphae melanization, just like our cells have melanin in them to protect our cells from damaging ionizing radiation of the sun and some other things. This fungus can produce melanin, and so if you could imagine this in 3 dimensions, where this area is, it's a 3-dimensional sort of cone of material on the inside here. Now with this melanization, presumably nothing can get through there, and now this is walled off and inside where the fungus lives, and that's its zone now to degrade and keep everything else outside. So again, woodworkers turn this type of wood into really pretty objects. So you can see here, this is a sugar maple from the Midwest that someone turned into a pipe. This is intact wood here that does not have a fungus. Inside the lines of the spalted lines, the wood's very light, and that's being degraded by the fungus. Not anymore, because this has been turned into furniture. So I don't know if you've ever heard of something that's kind of similar called, I don't know if you can read this, Tunbridge ware. Tunbridge ware is a type of antique wood boxes that was made in Tunbridge Wells, England, which is kind of down in the southeast part of England, back in the 1800s. And Tunbridge Wells is a place where there were these natural spas and springs that people would go there on retreat from, tuberculosis or vacation or whatever. The woodworkers in the area already were doing a type of wood inlay and making artifacts and things like this here that they'd learned from Italian woodworkers like the century before. Anyways, they decided with all of these tourists coming in to make like small objects that they could sell really quickly for less money, but it turns out they could make a fortune making lots of these. And so some of the woodworkers, but not all of them, knew about certain types of colored wood that they could incorporate into their boxes with these geometric patterns. And a lot of the boxes and other artwork, religious icons and triptychs and things like that, there might be a woodland scene, so there might be green foliage. They would use this type of green wood. And there might be other colors of the wood used as well. So this was a really neat trick. Only some woodworkers knew about this type of oak called green oak. And there was also red oak used, which is kind of a fuchsia color. There's no such thing as green oak or red oak. These woodworkers knew a mycologist that knew how to find the wood that was attacked by a special kind of a fungus that caused the wood to be colored like this. So I have one, this isn't my box, I have one very similar to it that I bought when I was writing this book because I got really into Tunbridge ware. So, has anyone ever heard of this before? It was made only for like about 30 years in the late 1800s, and the box I have is from 1890. It came from an antique store in London. So pretty neat. And it has a fun little tie-in. Who knew? So this sort of thing, I was told by the publishers, the team that put the book together that I did, they were all in the UK. They worked for Uni Press, and Uni Press made the book for Princeton University Press. So anyways, the three copy editors I worked with, they all knew about Tunbridge ware, and they're like, oh yeah, actually everybody has these. Someone in the family has these. No one knows that this has to do with the fungus. Is that weird? So pretty cool. Okay, but you don't have to go looking for green oak or curly maple or whatever to find spalting. Lots of wood rot fungi do this. In fact, you can find these right around your house. Have you ever heard of this fungus, Lophodermium piastri? It causes a needle cast. It's maybe one of the most common fungi on Earth, and almost nobody's ever heard of it. It's a very tiny little guy. It's these little things here, these little pustules. It grows, not even really sure what its life cycle is. It seems to live inside of conifer needles, not all conifers, but some true pines. It seems to live maybe as an endophyte the whole life of the tree, and then either it causes the needles to die, or more likely when the needles just naturally senesce and fall off, then it goes into sexual reproductive mode and starts breaking down the needles. And here's how it does it. There's apparently lots of little colonies of Lophodermiums and all of these needles, that each one walls off its own little zone. Wherever you see a red arrow, there's a perfectly straight black line. Look at all these. These are all spalted lines. So presumably, in this section of this needle, maybe between this barrier and this barrier, this is maybe one individual. And it walls this little part of the needle off and says, that's mine. It rots this needle and then makes these little pustule fruit bodies. And then those blow spores up into the air, and then it presumably reinfects the tree. You can see there's spalted lines all over these. But who looks for stuff like this? This is tiny. I mean, Gary Linkoff did. He was always picking up sticks and things. But this is super cool, and it's basically the same phenomenon going on as those big giant polypores, but at a much smaller scale. Okay, so as I said, turns out probably most fungi are not actually rotters or saprobes. Most are probably biotrophs. That means they have to live with a living partner. And so the term for this is a symbiont. And I specifically put this on this slide because you see in media, printed matter, and stuff like this all the time, TV shows, whatever. People use the word symbiont or symbiotic to mean mutualistically beneficial, you know? That's actually not what it means. Symbionts are organisms whose lives are obligately intertwined. So parasite, which is damaging to the host, parasite and host are symbionts. COVID-19 virus and humans are symbionts. It's definitely not beneficial to us. Everyone knows that. Everyone that believes in it knows that. So anyway, so that's what symbiont means. So it turns out a lot of fungi, probably most are mutual, are biotrophs, and maybe many of them are parasites. Maybe most of them are parasites. Probably most life on Earth is a parasite. And you can do the math yourself, and pretty simply, it's very simple to think that every species of organism, every species of fungus, plant, whatever, every species has its own species-specific parasite. And that's pretty simplistic. There's probably at least 2 species-specific parasites for every host. So quickly you've just determined that there's probably most life is a parasite on the planet. So parasites aren't necessarily all bad. There's lots and lots of them. So let's look at some biotrophic fungi. So a lot of them are predaceous and kill things. A lot of them are parasites, especially on plants. We don't have a whole lot of parasites that are fungal on us and other animals. Mostly our parasites are bacterial. The plants, it's another matter. Most parasites of plants seem to be fungi, but nobody's safe, not even slime molds. Have you ever seen this before, Nectriopsis violacea? This is actually quite common. This is a really pretty purple slime mold. And it's actually it's not a purple slime mold, it's the regular Physarum slime mold that you're used to seeing that's kind of brightly colored, kind of peach colored, and then it kind of turns ashen and then it blows away. But every once in a while you'll see one that's purple. The reason it's purple is because this slime mold has this fungus on it, and that's the only thing it does. It attacks and kills this slime mold. You've probably seen it, but you probably walked right by it. This one was a photo by Danny Newman, but we see it in Illinois every year on forays. Actually, I should back up. We see it in Illinois every year on forays ever since 3 years ago when one came in, and I'm like, oh, this is cool, and everyone's like, oh, I just thought that was just like garbage. I'm like, no, this is a fungus that kills this slime mold, and it's super common and no one ever talks about it. So ever since then, now everyone's like, oh, I remember seeing this, and now there's lots and lots of records of it. And it's probably out here as well, it's really common. If you mistook it for something weird going on, you'd be forgiven. The authority on this group of slime molds collected lots of these and labeled this as a certain variety. The purple variety was like variety violacea, or it was Physarum polycephalum variety violacea, or something. I don't know what it was. But anyways, when people went back through the collections and saw these, they're like, well, this guy actually didn't even look at them under the microscope. If he had, he would have seen there's 2 organisms here, a slime mold and this fungus. So, oh, it's huge. These get massive. I mean, there's no limit to how big they can get. When you pull into, I don't know about here, I mean, you have slime molds here for sure, but where I live in the summertime is the best time to see slime molds. In the summertime, we'll get like a heavy soaking thunderstorm, and then the next day, sun comes back out and gets really hot. So the thunderstorm gets slime molds active. They were thought to be fungi at one time because they kind of grow like fungi, but it turns out they're actually amoeba. And so they grow along, as long as it's wet, eating bacteria and things like that on surfaces, like wood chips and stuff like that. And then when the heat comes out, that's when they start to become visible because they start massing up to basically turn into a big mass of spores, and then you see it and then they blow away and the whole thing starts all over again. So if you've ever been in a parking lot where they put fresh wood chips down in the summer, again, this is how it works in the Midwest, and it looked like there was yellow or orange or peach colored or gray colored like vomit in like big patches, and it can be massive patches. There's no limit to how big they can get. Look closely because sometimes they'll be this purple color. Everyone knows about slime molds, right? You've seen them? Okay. There's other kinds that are a little dinky, but this is a very big giant. So nothing's safe. A lot of fungi are predaceous and parasitic on other fungi. Some are pretty selective. This is a fungus here called Sporophagomyces. It gets the name because it's a spore-eating fungus. So this fungus' claim to fame is it grows on large polypores, but it doesn't actually consume them. It oozes underneath where the spores are released and just sits there and eats the spores that fall from the pores. That's apparently all it does. The reason I'm pointing this out, here's a photo of this, the bottom right-hand corner. This is a photo of one that was brought into a foray in Illinois. Turns out this is really common everywhere, but no one ever sees it. And you know, when you bring stuff like this, like a polypore into the foray, and it has a mold on it, you know, usually it's the newbie of the bunch that does this, and then the experts are like, this is garbage. This is from years ago. It's got a mold growing on it, and sometimes it does, but every once in a while you'll feel one of these polypore cones, and it's heavy and kind of wet. You know it's fresh, but it has a mold on it, so take a look at it. It could be Sporophagomyces. This is pretty common, but again, no one ever sees it. Now that we know what it is, I mean, we see it quite regularly in Illinois, and this is known from other parts of the world as well. Anyone ever seen this before, Sporophagamyces? So, you know, when there's the experts in your club and they use a lot of scientific names like Agaricus bisporus, Sporophagamyces, of course they want you to think that they're a smarty pants by using only Latin names or scientific names. But in a lot of cases, stuff like this doesn't have a common name. So it's not that I just want you to think I'm a smarty pants. That's the only name we have for it. And I don't even know which species this is. So no one has seen that before, Sporophagamyces? Be a little bit down for it. Here's something you probably saw. When The Last of Us was on TV, I guarantee you, since probably most, if not all of you in here, you know, amongst your friends, you're known as the mushroom experts, so everyone watching The Last of Us, did they, of course, ask you, can that really happen? Can that happen to humans? And I didn't actually see it, but I heard so much about it, I felt like I watched it. Anyways, it has to do with sort of a fungus that's a cordyceps-like thing attacking humans, and that they attack other groups of animals, especially arthropods. Of course, it's no secret, they're masters of it. These are some photos of Daniel Winkler, who's a mycologist up in Washington State. He goes to the tropics to find these things. Some of them have these really long stalks on the fruit bodies because the host that it's killed is underground and has to make these stalks that go up into there. They're pretty cool to see. When I was a student, there was almost no cordyceps known. Now there's like thousands of cordyceps known. There's been so much cordyceps research. There was like one family of cordyceps. Now there's many families of different cordyceps-like stuff. It's become a real hot area of research, and a lot of them are pretty interesting and do, you know, really specific things. A number of them make different types of compounds that we can use as medicine and drugs and things. So it's a pretty interesting area. But there's more to the story than that, of course, because we have cordyceps in and around here. You don't have to go to the tropics. So this is a photo of one from the southeast. This photo was taken by Trad Cotter of a cordyceps on an ant. And in fact, the photo is upside down. If I showed it the right way, it'd be hard to understand what was going on. So it's easier when I show it upside down, because here's the ant body and the head, and this is the cordyceps sticking out of it. So this is kind of like this Last of Us type stuff. So the fungus gets into the ant or other arthropod, lives inside of the organism for quite a long period of time, slowly sort of digesting the insides of the organism, but not touching the brain, because that would kill the insect prematurely, and now the food source and the host for this fungus is like done. So not until the very end is the brain going to be attacked, and the fungus, besides being so in tune to doing what everything a fungus needs to do, it also can do animal-like things, because it can produce hormones and other stimuli that tells animals what to do. In this case, it tells the ant to climb up as high as it can and position itself over where the colony is marching through the understory, presumably. And again, should be upside down. And then it starts making spores out of the fruit body, which is right here, that then rain down, presumably on the ant trail below, and completes the life cycle. So, but the part where it zombifies, is the term for it, the ant tells it where to climb, is pretty amazing. And a lot of different these cordyceps type fungi do it. But here's what's going on here. So this is that ant here, and the stalk comes out of the neck when it's reproducing, and on top of the stalk is this stroma, this sort of mass of fungal tissue. And that's sort of the fruit body. Inside the stroma, this is magnified, and you can see all these little bumps. Each one of these bumps, there's an opening, and that's where the spores come shooting out. The spores come shooting out of, this is a cross-section of that, and so the asci in here, and the asci produce the ascospores, and that's what gets blasted out of that that little pore there. So these are ascomycetes. These are things like morels. These aren't things like amanitas and rushes and stuff like that. So pretty cool. But you've seen stuff like this before. Has anyone ever seen a cordyceps before? That's a few people. You've seen other fungi that make a structure very much like this that's in a different group of ascomycetes. So as an example, this is a cross-section of a dead man's fingers. So you know about dead man's fingers, the Xylaria polymorphas, and there's other species. So when you find one of these in the forest, they're fairly noticeable. They're about as big as your finger. And what color are they? They're very black, very, very black. If you find them early on, they actually can be covered in a white powder, because that's the asexual stage in some of them making conidia. But anyways, the structure later in the season will be black, And if you've ever snapped it in half, what's the color inside? No one's ever done that? Why not? Just do it, man. You can break them. They're very white inside. If you were to slice it, where was the t-shirt with the picture of the xylarias on it? Yeah, okay, so stand up. Okay, so pictured on the screen, I won't shine it in your eyes. Pictured on the screen is a cross-section of xylaria. This looks better though. So yeah, the outer surface is very black. The inside is very, very white, which makes it very easy to see these structures here. These perithecia, that's the structure that produces them. In fact, you can see those little black perithecia there. And I think we're done. Yeah, so that's where the ascospores come shooting out. So they have basically the similar type of structure as a cordyceps. And so what about this here? It looks like a cordyceps, except what's it attached to? It's attached to a grain. So this is ergot, Claviceps purpurea. This is what causes ergotism and is the source of LSD, etc. So this is another fungus that has a life, it's fairly closely related to cordyceps. It doesn't attack insects. It attacks plants. It makes an amazingly similar stalk with an amazingly similar sclerotia at the top that produces ascospores. This was one that was collected at the Namaphore in Wisconsin that I hosted. And has anyone ever seen Claviceps ergot on grass before? It's super common. Nobody ever sees it because why would you look for stuff like that? But it's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool fungus. And the whole history of this, and in Europe, and potentially the Salem witch trials, and LSD, and the Summer of Love, and Timothy Leary, and Albert Hoffman, and fascinating stuff. Yeah, we just celebrated Bicycle Day just a couple weeks ago. Some of us did. Some of us in other ways than others. So here's another one that's one of these cordyceps, and this attacks this caterpillar in the Himalayas. So this caterpillar is the larval stage of the ghost moth that lives there, and this is in the Himalayas. It's sort of like steppe type habitat, which means STEPPE, steppe type habitat, which is quite dry. So there's really no trees around. It looks like the Great Plains, except it's mountainous, and so all the plants are quite small, like grasses and things. So this guy comes along and it's munching all kinds of different plants. When it somehow gets a spore of this cordyceps in its body, it goes through several molts of skin and everything, completes the whole life cycle. When it comes to the end of the season and it's time to go in the ground and pupate and turn into a moth and then come out as a moth next season, well, that's not going to happen in this case because this cordyceps fungus basically takes over and does the zombification thing, and rather than the caterpillar digging as deep down as it possibly can to overwinter and avoid freezing and dying, normally dig down as deep as it can. The fungus zombifies it and tells it, only to dig down so deep because it can only make a stalk so long. And also it tells the caterpillar to make sure and have your head sticking upright, which it would normally never do. But again, that's beneficial to the fungus. So that's why it does this sort of thing. So this is pretty cool. When I've led a couple myco tours in Nepal, and the second one we actually came upon someone with these and even got to try them. So they're around in the Himalayas. You've heard of this type of a fungus, right? This cordyceps thing. So this is by weight the most expensive food, actually I think substance on the planet. It's worth way more than gold by weight. So in the Himalayas, when this is the season, especially in the Tibetan autonomous region of China, which is a massive area in western Tibet. If it was a country, it'd be one of the bigger countries. It's a massive area. This is 75 to 85% of the entire GDP of the Tibetan autonomous region is that. So you're probably going to ask, well, when this is the season for this, do a lot of people go looking for it, or does everyone go looking for it? Yes, every single person goes looking for it. All businesses, schools, everything stops. Literally everyone goes to collect this because it's worth so much more than they can make doing any other job. And so if the next question is, so if there's like millions of dollars of this being harvested and brought to sales centers and distribution centers, is it like the Wild West? Are there like armed military and machine gun stuff? Yes, there are. And shootouts happen and murders and stuff because, again, this is millions of dollars like sitting in piles amongst people that make like $600 a year. So yeah, it's just like that. Isn't it amazing? So, pretty crazy. So this is used in traditional Chinese medicine for lots of various, uses and cures and things like that. It's been used for a long, long time. Yes.
Is it sustainable?
Is it sustainable? More on that in a second. But you don't have to go to the Himalayas to see it. Did you have a question?
Or I was going to
Is it sustainable?
suggest another place you could see it.
What's that?
I was going to suggest another place you could see it, which is on eBay.
Yeah, you can see it on eBay. You can see, there's lots and lots of videos and stories and things like it too, because it's become so popular. But so again, you don't have to necessarily go to Tibet to see stuff like this. You can see stuff like this around here or in Europe. So we have other cordyceps that attack other insects. We're about to have a big cicada hatch in the east, and that it's not a cordyceps, but it's something kind of similar. And here's a picture of one that gets on a truffle. This is the deer truffle. Whoops, Elaphomyces. Elaphomyces is this deer truffle, and this bright yellow rhizomorph is attached to this cordyceps. So we have these in North America. This is Halopopalladium or Elaphocordicep sophioglossaides. The QR code here is a shameless ad for you to click on that, and you'll get information about myco tours I do in Italy and other places. And there's several people in this room that have gone on these tours, and I think maybe, I don't know if Ron or you or Kitty were on the tour.
Yeah, I saw that one.
Yeah, that's where we collected that one. But they're actually pretty common. Has anyone ever seen the cordyceps that occur on truffles? So we have them in the west, and there's also in the east. In the east, ours looks a little different than this one. It looks like this guy here, which again looks a lot like that ergot fungus, right? It's like this knob on a stick. The thing is, these are around, and when you're doing a foray, people will find them, but often they'll come along and they see something sticking out of the ground, and like, that looks like, I don't know, not really a mushroom, but it has to be fungal, and they'll grab this thing. They're not very big, but they'll grab this thing and pull it out of the soil and bring it in, and people are like, oh, that was a truffle. If you would have dug down and got, the host, then, we get 2 names on the list instead of just 1, and then you don't hear them very well. But anyways, these are really, really common. Typically, you don't really see them unless it's a really dry foray, and then people are kind of crawling around logs and stumps where there's still some moisture, and then you're close to the ground, and then you see all these little things sticking up. But they're actually quite common, believe it or not. Okay, so back to this. So the question was, is this sustainable? So there's a lot of concern that with everyone collecting every single one of these, that maybe the ghost moth or the cordyceps fungus will be wiped out. I mean, it's happened with stuff before. I'm not so sure that it will, and here's why. So believe it or not, so this thing worth more than maybe any other thing on the planet by weight, and it's been used for centuries. Everybody knows everything about this, where it grows, when it fruits, all kinds of names for it, except turns out you don't really know everything about the life cycle. It was just discovered a few years ago that the spores this thing makes here, the ascospores, so they blast out of here and waft over the landscape and somehow get into another caterpillar. Maybe it breathes them in, maybe it lands on plants that it eats. Probably doesn't happen. The ascospores of this thing maybe don't matter at all. How the caterpillar probably got the fungus was already in the plants. Isn't that incredible? So this fungus that can do all of the things a fungus needs to do to be fungusy also can get inside of a plant and live its entire life in the plant forever as an endophyte and create plant-like hormones that probably are beneficial to the plant, or at least allow it to evade the plant's immune system and do that its whole life. When the caterpillar comes along, weirdly now, it munches the plant. The fungus gets into the digestive system of the caterpillar and now does animal stuff. It makes animal hormones and zombifies the animal and tells it what to do. That's really hard to believe. It's hard to believe that that could happen. We knew everything about this for centuries, yet hidden in plain sight was this one part of the life cycle that nobody knew. As hard as it to believe, this has happened actually a long, long time ago, much longer ago than cordyceps. Before cordyceps was even on the planet, other fungi were zombifying insects. Have you ever seen this before? This is an Entomophthora, insect destroyer, Entomophthora musi. This is a super common fungus. Where I live in the wintertime is the best time to see these because you're indoors and flies get into your house and they fly around and can't get back out. And you'll in the Midwest, I guarantee you, if I was telling the story, people would start nodding their heads because everyone has seen this. In your home in the winter, when it's very cold, a fly gets in your house, you'll find a fly stuck to the window. And most people, it sounds funny, but most people, when you ask how that happened, they're like, I guess, it's flying around and sees that window. It doesn't understand clear glass, but it got going at such velocity. When it hit that window, it just killed itself and stuck to the window. And that's ridiculous. What actually happened was, house flies and a lot of other flies, maybe all flies, pick up this fungus somehow. The fungus lives in it. The fly's flying all around your house. It can't get out. And of course it keeps going to the light because it knows that that's out. And eventually it basically runs out of energy and isn't able to fly anymore. So it's now on the sill, depressed, because it can't get out. And it doesn't know it's cold outside, because that would actually be a disaster. But okay, but it has still a little bit of energy left, and the fungus knows it's about time for this fly to expire. The fungus zombifies it and has it crawl up as high as it can possibly crawl, just like the ant, and latch onto the window somehow. But instead of doing the cordyceps thing with this weird stalk that comes out of the neck, entomoptera, which are zygomycetes, these are very primitive fungi. They evolved a long time ago. This thing just erupts through the entire exoskeleton and blasts all of these phyalins, which are like conidiaphores, and makes all of their spores. It covers the insect. There'll be like dust around like a halo around the insect on the window pane. And I mean, you'll see these in the summertime too. It's hard to see them because when they die, they're up on top of a tree leaf or something. So I mean, it's all. If you grow onions, that's where I usually see them, on the tips of onions dead, clinging on, because it's easy to spot stuff. But otherwise on your window. Has anyone ever seen entomoptera before? So these zombify. So Val, you've seen them.
Oh, I photographed it in that house on the window.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, with the halo.
Yep, so again, this was zombifying things before cordyceps was ever even invented. So, so although cordyceps got all the fame for being a zombie fungus, this was doing that way before.
So good. Can you eat it?
Oh my God! Is it a fly?
There's always one in every group. So you laugh, but when we get to the end of my talk in like 2 more hours, that's when I have culinary notes and recipes for all of these fungi. But you have to stick around. So yeah, actually most of the fungus is not edible. Just the tiny little, the tips of the phyalins right there. That's edible. So this parasitic wasp is coming, and it sniffed out the fly. This is actually what I've studied my whole life. It's like coevolution between Mycophagus diptera and also parasitic wasps and mushrooms. So this guy's landed on this big housefly because it's a parasite, but it's too late for the party. This guy's already died.
Yeah.
So there's other things. If you look really closely at insects, there's other cool things you'll see. These are Labule-Biniales, an order of fungi called Labule-Biniales. It was first erected and studied by a guy named Roland Thaxter, who discovered a lot of crazy fungi. Has anyone ever heard of this order, Labule-Biniales? It's the largest order of fungi, and you've never heard of it. How's that possible? So like Agaricales, that's like a lot of the capped gill. Everyone's heard of Agaricales. There's way more Labule-Biniales. So what do? It's not really even understood what they do, but they're everywhere and they're on insects. When you get insects like beetles and things, take a look at them. You'll think there's a piece of dirt, or maybe you'll think like it's an extra antennae or something, but it's these little creatures riding around on the insect. So they have to point out. So they mostly attach, they love to attach to beetles, but a lot of other insects and other arthropods will get Labule-Biniales. So this is supposedly Hesperomyces, virescens, I mean, who would really know? But if you notice where these things are attached, this is on the elytra, that's these outer covers over the wings. So its hyphae doesn't go into this and then into the bug. This isn't attached to the bug, except up here at the top. So it's attached only like 1 cell layer deep inside the outer part of this shell. What the heck's it doing? Is it digesting this material? Maybe, but it's not digesting very much.
Going on vacation.
It's just going for a ride. So you'll usually see them actually, not necessarily over the whole back. When you see them on beetles and other insects, they're often kind of around the lower part. And that's because when one copulates with the other, they kind of spread these things. So that's you'll see maybe some on the other side, but on the top part. These fungi are super tiny. They're only like 2 to 3 cells total. They're very tiny, but they're so cool. We even had an issue devoted to them, a Fungi magazine. Without a doubt, it's the only time Labul Binyales have ever been on the cover of anything. Nobody appreciates them, but there are people that study them. Again, Ronald Baxter did, and then this guy Danny Hillwaters from Harvard, he studied them. He's named lots of species. So you want to discover and name species, you can do this. And here's how to do it. Just go to museums and start pulling out all the drawers. And ask permission first. Start pulling out all the drawers of all the arthropods and just start looking at them. They all have Labul Binyales, and new ones are discovered all the time. During the pandemic, when no one could travel or go to your lab or whatever, there were Labuls discovered in museum collections, and the famous one was on, I think, a centipede in Europe, and someone was going through collections, and some of the centipedes literally had extra appendages, which shouldn't happen. And so when they were posting photos to, I think, a Facebook group of other like centipede enthusiasts, a scientist in North America said, I don't know what that is. And so I think they sent the specimen over to that person's house, who then scoped it and was like, oh, that's a fungus, that's one of these on there. And so this new species of Labul Binyales, the specific epithet was Twitterized, because it was posted on Twitter. That's how it was, yeah. So during the pandemic, there were a lot of these sort of stories that people were using social media to discover that. So this is pretty cool organism. So, and I think that wraps up the mutualistic symbionts for right now. There's so many more stories to tell you, but you'll have to buy the book, because so thanks for your attention. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, we do.
Great. Probably ought to ask my driver. Wake him up. Does everyone know my driver, Mike Wood, and his lovely wife, Jane Bernzinska, sitting right here? So Mike's been a presence. I don't want to say huge presence. Mike's been a presence. Does that sound weird? In the Bay Area, he's been one of the pioneers. He's one of the authors of the big book of California mushrooms with 2 other authors, and he was around doing this sort of thing that I do decades before I came on the scene. And I think most of the people that have been in this club for a long time for sure know Mike and Jane. And they're having their wedding anniversary coming up in just a few days too. So if you don't know Mike, you'll see stuff with Mike's name on it, and or go to California Fungi online, or pick up his book too, because he's been in there forever. Pete, do we have time for questions?
Yeah, I think we have a few minutes. Yeah, I think we have a few minutes.
Did you have your slide with the info on the book?
Oh. Yeah.
Do you have books with you?
I don't have any books. So Peter said he worked with the publisher to get this discount code, which I'll show you, to get 30% off.
130.
Yeah, so I flew out here, so it's impossible for me to haul books because they're heavy. And actually, so the publisher, I had a very good time doing this book with them, and actually have done a second book that's coming out in October with the same publisher, Princeton University Press. And they're a really great press for scientific books. They probably do more scientific books than anybody. Anyways, everything was wonderful. The one thing that's sort of a shortcoming is they don't give authors a very big discount for some reason. So your club or you can get books actually, believe it or not, cheaper than I can. So that's another thing. I never have any copies. So that's how that goes. Maybe for your fair in the winter, order a whole bunch, and then everybody can get a discount.
Yeah, it's possible.
Any other questions? So,
I've got a question. Has nothing to do with anything you directly presented, but the sort of thing you might know about.
yeah. Sure you look at
And that's through the Ascomycetes, the annual hypoxon, the cramp balls.
Yeah.
You know, you've all seen of these hard woody things that are all over the place. How do they?
So those are in the xylarium,
Yeah.
by the way, which is a big
how do they develop? I always see them as these hard little rocks. A hard rock doesn't just appear on the bark on the outside.
So
I've
do-
never seen a,
Do you know what so annual hypoxylon and hypoxylon and Daldinias, these are these kind of like bumps. They're in the xylari ales, which means they form parathecia, these little chambers in there, and the acai blast spores. Xylari alien fungi, it's a huge group of ascomycetes. And this is another really great example of stuff that everybody knows about that's hidden in plain sight. I always wondered, we don't have annual hypoxylon in the east that I know of anyway, but we do have Daldinia and hypoxylon and xylari and stuff like that. Anyways, I always wondered how Daldinias, when I walk through the forest in the Midwest, they're typically on dead, fallen branches and twigs of a certain size, not usually logs, usually branches and things like that, and hypoxylon might be on big logs, and then there's, and stuff like Ernula is on certain size. How do they find that specifically sized thing and get there before other stuff glommed onto it? And it turns out, again, discovered literally just a couple years ago, these are endophytic fungi. They didn't get onto the branches after the branches fell off the tree. They were already in the branches in the canopy, because that's where it lives its whole life. And probably never reproduces sexually. The branch breaks, or senesces, or whatever, falls off, lands, and now the fungus goes into saprobic mode, rotting the wood, and then produces the sexual stage. But the question was, when they're starting out, what do they look?
right, because they're always hard and brittle and a certain size.
So if you look around when they're first coming on, there'll be kind of a mass of material on the outer surface of the wood, and that'll kind of wither away, and then a lot of it will start forming this more of a stromal type tissue, kind of like that stalk there. But it can take quite a while to form. And in fact, as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it leaves actually growth rings. Daldinias show this really well, and that's one species, Daldinia concentrica, because it has these growth rings. So if you find one of these, annual hypoxylon is great because they're huge. Daldinias are not as big. Just slice it in half, and you'll see these growth rings. So it starts out with it starts out this kind of a mass thing around it, and then it gets like this little bump going, and then the bump gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then finally it's big enough to make spores. And you know what color the spores are? Very black, yeah. So when you see these masses on the dead wood, around them will be very black powder. If they come into a foray and they're on the table, on a paper plate or something, yeah, there'll be spores everywhere. It's like the blackest black colored spores. But the xylari ales are really a cool fungi, do a lot of cool things, and again, most people have always kind of passed them by, but they have a neat relationship, and it's not really even known if they're beneficial with the tree or not, but they're for sure living in the tree before they start rotting wood. And again, everybody knows xylari and Daldinia, but nobody knew that until just a few years ago. Isn't that crazy? Yes, ma'am.
I have a neat little question. So thank you so much. This presentation was just totally fascinating, and I thought it's super accessible, which says a lot for this the kind of language you're doing with. So thank you. Question. So very interesting that the morels are popping up as their symbiotes die, right? But fire is not the only way that a tree dies. It could be logged. But I don't think we see morels coming up around logging. So is there something to do? It's also for logging.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it's very interesting you mentioned that, because most people, like nobody in the Illinois club or the Wisconsin club that I'm in, I won't say nobody, there's a couple people that know, but almost nobody, even the people that know morels really well, don't know about this simply cutting the tree phenomenon. So some of my best morel picks were, I got a tip, they logged that spot that we used to go for in the summer for chanterelles or in the fall for other stuff. I'm like, wait, they logged that? Okay, well, it's too bad for some of my other stuff, but there's a whole bunch of elms and stuff in there. And so no one would think to look there because there's no sign there were elms ever even there. And the ones that were there were alive, so no one would check. And and of course it's all like cleaned out and it's like a lunar landscape. And there's been tons of morels. And again, they didn't die naturally, they were cut. So yeah, it works the same way. And obviously people have seen with their own eyes the logging phenomenon that works just like the burn phenomenon. Yeah, pretty cool. Yes, sir.
Speaking of morels,
we obviously had a big fire here a couple of years ago, and yet there wasn't a whole lot of morale activity that I heard about. And I'm wondering if the intensity of the fire makes a big difference.
So, obviously, just having a fire isn't the only thing. There obviously needs to be enough moisture during the season and these sorts of things. So, have most people picked morels on a burn area or what? Quite a few. Okay. Where I'm from, almost nobody ever has, and they always dream about going out west and doing it. So, having picked on burn morel site only a couple times, what I quickly noticed was, and you can tell me if this is what you've seen as well. Sort of in the middle part where the fire was hottest, I didn't see a lot of morels. It was sort of on the perimeter where the trees were scorched and still had like sort of singed leaves. You know what I mean? So that seemed to be where the heaviest fruiting was, which tells me that that particular fire I was on anyway, it was so hot in much of the area, it sterilized the soil and cooked the roots and everything, and so everything's dead. But around the perimeter where the fire was slowing down and then got snuffed out, it was enough to kill and scorch the trees, but not to sterilize the soil.
Additional fire question?
Yeah.
So after a big fire like we had here, how long does it take in those really heavily burned areas for the mycelium to return and for you to get the same kind of fruitings that we used to get?
That's anybody's guess. And I wonder that too a lot when there's a big logging area or some sort of other major disturbance, maybe it takes forever for a lot of stuff to come back, and maybe it never comes back. The same with a lot of plants too, so some stuff will bounce right back and some won't. And some types of plants, the seeds can persist in soil for decades. Where I live in Illinois, King County, Illinois, throughout Illinois there are forest wetland preserves. So it's a special kind of forest that's a preserve that also has kind of a swampy wetland, and they're really super great habitats for like everything because it has the forest and the wetland. My county, King County, has the most forest wetland preserves, and my property is sort of like a mini forest wetland preserve. Anyways, within just a mile or two of my house is the largest one in the state, and it's in my county. So I go to this place all the time, and there are great big signs that show this vast area. It was major swampland, and with swamp meadow type plants that have a special habitat. The Europeans came in, drained the area, and farmed it, and slowly the county started getting pieces of land put together, set aside, and then eventually enough contiguous land that they made this rather large park. Anyways, on this sign it shows 3 species of flower that were extinct. They had this specific habitat of like kind of a wetland meadow area, totally extinct. I think it says totally extinct. Anyways, after they broke up all of the drainage tile and just let the water come back, these plants came back. It had been farmed for over 100 years. The seeds were still in the soil somehow, waiting for the right conditions. And the point of this is that, the plants that are in the forest and the meadows, in the millions of years, those species have been in there. There's been a lot of stuff that's happened. There's probably been droughts, in California. There's probably been decades, maybe centuries-long droughts. And the plants, not everybody survived, but some of them figured this out. Or there's been massive fires that just burned up everything. And some have withstood that, and now they're prepared when it happens again. And so some are more resilient. As far as the mycorrhizal fungi goes, I don't know. It probably takes quite a while, but I know the people that study, like that lady at the very beginning, the scientist at Colorado State. So she studies how this stuff happens and also gets foresters to inoculate things when they're planting them back, or to aerial drop mycorrhizae and things like this to get them established earlier on. So, but that's actually a good question I don't know the answer to.
I was up in El Dorado last week, and the Caldor fire, I think what is it, almost 2 years ago? 3 years ago. Last year, the area that I found a nice population coming up. Last year, it was a lunar desert. It was amazing. It was just so dead. And when I went up this year, there were plants coming up. Miner's Misery, we always love that one, but Miner's Misery was starting to come up. So life was coming back, and that lunar landscape was now producing morels. So, you know, it depends on when the growth is coming back, when the climate's right and the conditions are right, and life comes back, and you start seeing the little cubs, and you start seeing other fungi, and you know, they'll be out there.
Yeah, a lot of stuff's adapted. It's, you know, sad to see when it just keeps happening over and over, the fires repeatedly. That's a bad situation, unfortunately. Yes, sir.
Rick, I just had a quick question about the slide that you had on the fly. You had the fungus growing on the fly, and then you had the parasitic wasp, I think you said. That was interesting. I was wondering, are there also parasitic? And it seemed like you suggested that they were probably going for the fly. And I was just wondering if there, you know, I know that there's some flies and wasps, but also can go onto slime molds that are associated with slime molds. And I was wondering, is there any association between these parasites and the fungi themselves, or is it just?
Good question. Not many people study, you know, stuff like that, because it's not necessarily economically important or exciting, or, you know, it's just flies. So, I mean, let's face it. So, you know, a lot of this stuff, no doubt, gets moved around by organisms. You know, hummingbirds visiting flowers move yeasts and things around that are in the nectar and pollinating insects. And, you know, a lot of this stuff gets moved around and spread that way. So, you know, it's possible that's how the fungus got to the fly in the first place, maybe parasitic wasps, you know, attacking it or injecting its egg into the side of it. Because that's how some of them operate. I don't know. A lot of unknowns. Anybody else? And what was the story with the pizzas? I was promised pizza. I was promised pizza. There's no pizza? I'm just glad that we finally got the key and could come in and have a screen. I didn't want to have my little tiny laptop that would have been low. So, okay, well, thanks again, everybody.